I cannot believe what I just sat through. Not only did this prove that the British Grand Prix again was a circuit of high drama, but also I had to sit through a couple of burst blood vessels after what they did to my boy. But I'll get to that later in a more calm and measured manner because, let's be real, what Lewis Hamilton did today, yeah, that was special. Even he thought so. I don't think anybody could be mad at Lewis picking up the win today. Even Max was gracious in defeat. And it proves finally that Mercedes have developed their car to a position where it can be competitive and can go for wins consistently without having to rely on sitting back and watching other people crash in front of them. And you know what's what? They're planning upgrades for Hungary and Spa. They're not stopping. So don't be surprised to see Hamilton or Russell bagging another victory before the year's out. This is mad. And he's now the only driver to have bagged a Grand Prix victory, having surpassed 300 Grand Prix starts. You could tell this meant a lot to him, as he did weep on the radio, which is something he's claimed he's never done before. And to be fair, I don't recall him getting that emotional on the radio before. Even he was taken aback. And to be fair, he isn't wrong, because he compared what he did to when Rubens Barrichello bagged his first victory at Hockenheim in 2000, and he absolutely bawled on the radio, understandably so. Whatever you think of Lewis Hamilton, this was a special place in which to get this victory, and he's now going to be leaving Mercedes, heading to Ferrari, having bagged at least one more Grand Prix victory, and in the Grand Effect era, which means some hope for him in 2025. That is, if Ferrari can get their act together at the moment, because right now, I bet Lewis is thinking, oh, Mercedes is now better again. Oh, okay. But then again, you also have to counter that with the fact that maybe the change in the idea of going to another team has rejuvenated him. If he just stayed put at Mercedes, we might not have seen this uptick in performance, this motivation. So, swings and roundabouts, really. And, oh yeah, you can easily understand why Lewis Hamilton deserved the victory, because not only was he able to pass Russell for the fact that Russell was finding the conditions more tricky than him, but also in the cool-down room, he was talking to Lando about the strategy and the slicks that he changed onto, and the fact that McLaren had the mediums, and then asked, did you change to the mediums? And then Lando said, no, I changed to the soft, and then Lewis was like, what? And once again, not many people noticed that Haas, and more particularly Nico, bagged yet another 6th place, maintaining his grid slot. And once again proving that whatever calibration settings Haas has got down on the wind tunnel, they're working really, really well, bucking the trend of all of their nearby competitors, Racing Bulls, Aston Martin, of producing upgrades that actually work on the first bounce. And Hulkenberg was making that car dance at the track where he excelled in 2020 as the super sub Racing Point. And let me put this into perspective of how good Nico's been. I cannot stress this enough. In 2 races, he's bagged 16 points, and that's the same amount of points that Checo has scored since the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. And yeah, I mean, Checo's not doing well at the moment, but when you consider a Haas driver has scored more points in 2 races than Checo has done in 5 or 6, I don't mean to be harsh with the comparison, but Hulkenberg and Perez were teammates, and during the Austrian Grand Prix, Hulkenberg was able to run rings around the Mexican driver. And also, it reminds me of all of the videos I made last year about who could replace Perez in 2025, and I suggested Hulkenberg. I kept suggesting him, and really, I think that Red Bull is sleeping on this guy. He would be ultra compliant. It would be an absolute brilliant PR move, because everyone would love Hulkenberg and a Red Bull, much like how Red Bull saved the day when they got Checo in for 2021, saving him from the scrap creep in 2020 after the Sakir Grand Prix victory, which everyone was absolutely lauding. They could do it again here. And what's more, Hulkenberg is able to make the most of the brand new Haas. Ayo Komatsu must be loving this right now. Haas right now look like a competent and solid legitimate team. In the post-Steiner era, this is brilliant news. And then there was Williams, another performance which went relatively unnoticed given the stuff that was going on at the front. But Alex Albon was able to maintain, just like Nico did, the same position he started in on the grid, and he had damage to boot. Makes you wonder, and even Alex was reckoning this, that if he hadn't sustained that front wing damage near the start, he probably would have been able to leapfrog past Fernando Alonso for 8th place. And then, of course, let's not forget, Logan Sargent. This was probably one of his best weekends in his entire F1 career. Sure, He didn't get into Q3 and get 7th place on the grid like he did in Las Vegas last year. That was pretty special. But he managed to get 12th. He was almost getting into Q3, just a couple of people pipped him. And then in the race, he was quiet. He held his own. Everything was working out well for him. Unfortunately, the slow pit stop, because they double stacked, did impede Albon because he also had a slow pit stop to contend with, and therefore it might have compromised Logan's chance of getting past Yuki Tsunoda for 10th place. But 11th place, considering I think last year he got 11th place as well, this seems to be a really strong track for Logan. That's really good, and I just really want to give him credit because this was a really competent drive, especially amongst all the rumours that have been going around given his future, and that James Vowles is not necessarily dismissing a mid-season driver swap. Who with, I have absolutely no idea. And if those rumours are true, and Logan is going to be heading the Prema IndyCar 2025 campaign, then I will be watching IndyCar throughout the entire season. I'll be watching Logan's Indy career with great interest. Then Aston Martin. You gotta call them winners, really. It was a bit of a surprise, though, to see this team getting 10 points given their recent form. And it was even more of a surprise to see Stroll being the one who was the more settled driver. Oh wait, no, it's not been a surprise. They managed to pull away from Racing Bulls, but they still have to consider that Haas is catching up fast. They might really be in for the hunt for P5 at this rate if they keep this up, and Hulkenberg continues to bag 6ths and 7ths instead of just 8ths, 9ths, 10ths. Alonso reckons that maybe a change to Inter slightly earlier might have yielded better results for him, but hey, a double points finish after the turmoil they've had in the last few races where they've been even lucky to even get close to the top 10. That's some crumb of comfort, so not too bad there. And another reason why I put them in the winners list is because of this video I saw of Papa Stroll accepting a really wholesome gift from a young child. And okay, say what you will about Papa Stroll. He's certainly, on his good days, a nicer person and a nicer father than Jos Verstappen. Then we get to Oscar Piastri. I don't care if you call me biased. This was a great race for Oscar, and I'm prepared to shove data down your throat to prove it. Courtesy of F1 Tempo, and yes, I donated to them because I was this justified in saying that Oscar did better today than Lando. This was a race where Oscar was able to manage the tyres well, and in fact, show that he's a dab hand really when it comes to changeable conditions. When you look at the times before the rain came, he was changing faster lap times with Lando fairly consistently, and at some points he was a few tenths quicker. And then when the rain really came and the times fell off a cliff, Oscar was even quicker. And I think at one point he managed to close down from 2 seconds behind Lando to within half a second. And yes, then of course we had the situation where we had the pit stop, and then instead of losing a few seconds behind in a double stack, he lost 15 seconds, Oscar, in 2 laps. Oh. He then got stuck behind Carlos for a while, denying him the chance of the podium, and he got into P4 for the 2nd year in a row. Then when you get to the point when the change to slicks arrived, Oscar was faster in the transitional period as well. And when given the choice to go for mediums, he was clear on the radio that mediums were definitely the best tyre. No dithering. So even though he didn't get a chance for a podium, or let alone a chance for victory, or a McLaren 1-2, he was able to make his team and Lando look just that little bit silly in what tyre choice they made by him clawing back 10 seconds between he and Lando and almost getting the fastest lap in the process, but due to a last-minute stop for soft tyres for Carlos, he then got the fastest lap instead. But still, it was a quiet and dignified response to what McLaren were doing when it came to their strategy. But then I have to use the foam of doubt here, because say if things went by as intended, and it was a McLaren 1-2, yet Oscar was showing really good performance when it came to the changeable conditions between either a soft compound, a slick, or a wet weather tyre. Would he have been allowed to pass Lando, potentially going for a victory, his first one as well? Probably not, because, you know, this is the British Grand Prix, Lando Norris is a Brit, and I know that Oscar Piastri is from the Commonwealth, but that ain't good enough. And even though Oscar should really be mad as well, he just looked disappointed. In his interviews, he was just like, yeah, we do need to talk about this. We need to fix the situation, but it is what it is. And, you know, we showed that we had good performance. So he was dignified, a little bit artificial perhaps, but otherwise dignified. In a way, I think maybe this is for the best, because this has delayed the inevitable, because if we do get a team order spat, it's going to be fiery. Maybe it was best that it didn't happen here. Then Max Verstappen gets in here just because he was once again able to profit from the mistakes of others, but it wasn't quite enough to win this time around due to his first stint being particularly concerning for himself and the team. Now, it wasn't anything to do with the damaged floor that he picked up during qualifying, because under part firmé conditions, you can replace parts like for like if they're the same specification, and they replace the floor, so it's all good there. And after the fumbling of the pit stops in Austria and all that stuff, they were actually able to hold their own in terms of giving Max Verstappen the tyre changes he needed to get back up to second place, where he ended. All at the expense probably of Checo, because the tyre strategies and the calls with him were absolutely terrible. So, you know, all at the expense of one is able to excel. But it was Lewis's experience in these changeable conditions that was just about enough to keep him ahead, because yeah, Verstappen was on the hard tyre. It wasn't the best tyre, but it was certainly a dab hand better than the soft tyres. Oh my... And what's become clear right now is that Max is definitely outdriving that car. Right now, that car is slowly becoming the second or third fastest car. But in the hands of Max, he is able to make up the difference between his competitors. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton won out the day, but Max was once again able to showcase his talent in these conditions and show Schumacher-esque talent. Then another winner would have to be Brad Pitt's F1 movie. I saw the trailer and it's pretty neat. It's also quite nice to see them back here once again. After last year, they were met with derision, people were laughing at them, it was kind of weird. But this time around, people accepted them with open arms, it was kind of cool to see. And then showing the trailer and that it's actually coming to theatres, that's great. There are people in the trailer that I recognise, like, oh, there's Max Verstappen right there, and oh, there's Gunther Steiner, because of course there is. Speaking of which, he's a winner as well, because he's going to be taking all the credit on the tour that he's currently on, and which I've booked tickets for. He's going to be taking all the credit for Nico Hulkenberg's performance, saying, I was the one being able to get him in the car, I was able to do it, I did it, it was all me. This was his last great act for Haas. He's going to constantly go on about it, even though he's in the middle of a court case with them. Then we get to the sections, and once again, Carlos was the man to give Ferrari something to smile about. Yes, it was a race where Ferrari had no chance of bagging a top 5 finish in normal conditions, but Carlos was able to do a solid enough job to provide them some crumbs for comfort and bag the fastest lap, albeit doing the whole tactic of changing onto softs at the last minute to make sure that nobody else got it, in this case, Max and Oscar. And also, the decision of Ferrari to go back to the Imola spec of SF24, that probably was for the best, because this was an example of them rushing through all of these parts that were meant to come for the British Grand Prix, instead being rushed into Spain, it didn't work, they then have to tweak it a little bit, and now they've completely scrapped them, and they're now starting all over again, right when their technical director Enrico Cardile is off to Aston Martin. All of this hope for Ferrari is coming from the guy that they're sacking. Now, I can't do anything or say anything about what's happening for next year. It is what it is. It's happening. Nothing can change it. But right now, Charlotte is having so much bad luck, whereas Carlos is doing all that he can to showcase to all of the other teams, whoever's actually got the patience for him these days, that he is worth keeping, because he's able to give Ferrari, who are in the doldrums at the moment, a feeling that, hey, we can score something at least. But they need to fix this fast, because they need to bring upgrades that now work and make sure that they don't have a Spanish Grand Prix or a Canadian Grand Prix ever again if they hope to keep second now, because McLaren's only like 7 points behind them. Then we put Lando Norris here. This may seem harsh, but when you take the entire race into consideration, Lando fumbled the opportunity. However, I do not blame Lando for this entirely. He was not entirely accountable for this disappointing performance, because the fact of the matter is, though, is that in the heat of the moment, McLaren let him down. They should not have given him the choice of tyre, because they had the best type of tyre right there, and they then deferred to Lando. I know they're talking about taking the driver seriously and valuing their input, but the fact of the matter is, though, they had the strategy from Austria, which worked brilliantly, and they could have done it again here, and they didn't do it. And had the race been longer, I think Lando would have lost third place to Oscar, so he wouldn't have been on the podium at all. And yeah, I know, swings and roundabouts, a lot of if-onlys, and if the race had been longer, there would have been different strategies, I get it. But then you got to contrast it to what he was doing earlier on in the race, where he was brilliant. In those conditions, he was holding his own, he kept it together, he got past the Mercedes, and then he was able to really run rings around Lewis Hamilton. It just makes you really... Lando Prime is there. Don't get me wrong, he has his moments, he is improving very, very quickly. But when it comes to these urgent calls, this is when he really needs to dig deep and learn from this. This was an example of him given the choice of tyre, he made the wrong call, he admitted that himself, that he should not have picked the soft tyres and stuck to the original plan, and this was something that slipped through his fingers, and McLaren, they had a 1-2 in the palm of their hand and they didn't get it. And then, of course, Lando did miss his mark in the garage, so he was forward by a couple of meters, so he lost a couple of seconds there. He would have been right in the middle of Lewis, but then I think he would have lost to Lewis anyway. They might have made contact, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is, though, is that Norris, at the start, the first half of the race, brilliant, great. He was really solid, he was on for victory. But then the second half of that race, that call, to not double stack, it all fell apart for him. Then another meh is racing bulls. Yes, a point isn't that much to write home about, given that their rivals scored way more than them today, but it was at least a slight boost for Yuki's morale after a few races where Daniel looked like the better driver. And if the rumours are true, and that Checo's time at Red Bull might be limited, then this could be an opportunity for Yuki to try and hold his own in getting the opportunity to get that promotion to Red Bull and be the first Japanese driver to maybe win a Grand Prix or become the most successful Japanese driver in F1 ever. But in reality, it's gonna be Daniel, isn't it? Christian Horner, he's now sensing an opportunity to realise his grandmaster plan after all. Then we get to the losers, and George Russell is in this list. And this is not a reflection on his performance, no. This is only because of how much he lost. Pole position at Silverstone, his home race. He was leading convincingly. He managed to keep it clean at the start. No reflections of Qatar 2023 when he collided with Hamilton, even though Hamilton did accept the blame. It was all fair. It was all fun. It was exciting. But at the same time, it did show his limitations in these conditions, especially at this circuit where Lewis Hamilton does reign supreme. Russell should be proud of what he did and getting that pole, beating Lewis Hamilton in terms of a one-lap qualifying situation. Brilliant. So it is really a shame that he didn't get to see this opportunity out. But in a way, maybe him retiring early before this water pressure problem became a real issue, maybe that might have been for the best, because if you think about it, him retiring the car when he did, it would have been a bit more dignified than him maybe falling down the order or his car going bang in a puff of smoke instantly. That probably would have been all the more galling for him. So maybe him just quietly slipping away into the night and keeping that car preserved for another chance of getting for a victory or a solid podium at a future race. Yeah, that might be better. I don't know. I just feel really bad for George because he's managed to turn his F1 career around. Then we have to talk about Checo. Oh my goodness, man. Oh my goodness. Oh, not only did he not get out of Q1 again, but he span out of it in the process. This is not good. And as Christian Horner said, you'd think a contract extension would make him feel more confident. In fact, I think it's made it worse. Granted, his race was compromised by the team using him as a guinea pig for Max when it came to the choice of tyres and the timing of it. But we're getting to the point of the season where even Horner's not making excuses for him anymore. And the rumours are starting to circulate about his future again, and Helmut Marko, for once, is not the main instigator of all of this negativity towards Perez. It's mostly aimed at Horner for making this decision of extending his contract way too early. And now, there are a little more details sort of coming out of the woodwork regarding performance clauses in his contract. Because I remember last year, there was a performance clause in his contract, which meant that he would get a pay cut if he ended up being more than 125 points behind Verstappen, which of course he was. Who's to say that there aren't any more performance clauses in there? There may be more. Now, before you say anything, I don't want him to exit out of Red Bull in this fashion. No, I want him to see out his contract, and Red Bull should honour it, because they made that choice, and Checo's team was able to make that work. So, you know, props to Sergio's team for making that a reality. But you've got to look at the bigger picture here. Had George's car not failed him, Checo would have fallen even further down the driver's standings. And now, because of the 25 points Lewis bagged here, 8th in the driver's standings is a reality. I do feel that Red Bull is under a lot of pressure at the moment because McLaren and Mercedes, they're right on it and in some cases are beating them. And it's going to show that, as I mentioned earlier, Max Verstappen is the differentiator in making sure that that Red Bull car is slowly not falling down the front-running order and going towards the midfield and getting closer to that. I have absolutely no clue, and I feel really bad for him. I really do. Then we get to McLaren. And yes, this is also a harsh judgment, but I'm keeping my cool to not put these guys in the dark bit. I really am. And I know that a lot of people on Twitter were saying that, hey, you shouldn't feel so blue, Law. McLaren still scored a boatload of points, 27 points in fact. And now they're within 7 points of Ferrari for second place in the Constructors, and they've managed to get that little bit closer to Red Bull as well. Yeah, that's true, they did bag quite a few points, but at one point, it could have been 43, 44 if Oscar or Lando bagged the fastest lap. Had Lando been on the medium tyres, he probably would have done. They could have taken a 20-point chunk out of Red Bull, and Christian Horner would really be hot under the collar given how vocal the team has been of late. But no, what we got instead is proof that, sure, McLaren can build a really fast car. When it comes to them fighting at the front and their strategy, that needs severe work because they fumbled it. They messed up big time because they were fearful of a double stack. Because I think Zach Brown mentioned that they tried that in Jeddah to do a double stack. It didn't work out for them. And then just that one time made them completely risk averse to trying that again. The fact of the matter is though, by not doing that and keeping Oscar out for that little bit longer, he lost more time than he might have done if they lost maybe 3 or 4 seconds behind. That probably wouldn't have been so bad a pill to swallow. Oscar was there to be right behind Lando and get that 1-2 or fend off the Mercedes perhaps. That might have been enough, but no. They didn't get that opportunity because they absolutely messed up the strategy. And then they also messed it up again by just not sticking to their guns, but the strategy that worked in Austria so well and really gave them a shout for getting past Max Verstappen, they completely just deferred to their driver and then didn't realise, oh wait, no, why are we giving them this choice? Because they're driving the car under pressure. We have the keys to the castle here. Just stick to the plan. No, they didn't stick to the plan. And then they were really shown the reality that Oscar was so much faster. At one point, 2 or 3 seconds a lap faster. And then that might have been enough to keep Max behind us. Oh no. The team is fast, but they're not ready to go after Red Bull over the course of the season. Yes, right now, considering the deficit that Mercedes has to them at the moment, and considering how badly Ferrari have fallen off right now, they are going to be practically guaranteed second place in the Constructors. But if they want to have any hope of getting past Red Bull and leading or winning the Constructors, especially if Checo gets back on it and is scoring points again, they really need to improve their strategy. They cannot be afraid to take bold risks. Sure, okay, if the double stack had not been optimal and they had lost a few seconds, at least they tried it and they did what everyone else did. Seriously, these weekends, they cannot happen again. Then we get to Ferrari. Mamma mia, what's going on? After the highs of Monaco, this team is severely struggling. And okay, they're going back to the Imola spec of car where it showed some really strong potential. That's okay. They're at least willing to admit that, okay, we might have gotten it wrong. Let's try again. But right now, they are losing their technical director to Aston Martin, and there's no guarantee that Adrian Newey is going to be coming in to replace him. So they need to find some sense of direction now the person that's inspired this car is heading away from them. And now they've also got Charles Leclerc really struggling with his mental health and him feeling that this is simply not good enough. And now Lewis Hamilton's coming in. This is meant to be the season for Charles Leclerc to prove to everybody that he's going to be the one in charge. He's going to be the one to be leading the Scuderia into this new era of Formula 1 in 2026. And Lewis is going to be either his support or he's going to have to be second best, which of course is being Lewis Hamilton. That ain't going to happen. But this needed to be a statement of intent. And all this is doing right now is showing that Carlos Sainz is the more solid and accomplished driver. That's not the case. Charles on his day can be better than Carlos, but he's not been given the car in which to do it, because either Ferrari bungle the transitional time of going from one tyre to the other, or there's a mechanical issue which compromises his qualifying ability, or Charles buckles under the pressure. There are so many factors here that are going against him. He's probably one of the most unlucky drivers on the grid at the moment. This is just getting ridiculous at this point. And I debated about this on Twitter for a brief period, that maybe the exit clause that he has, that maybe he can leave for another team in a couple of years, it might be activated. He might need to go to another team just to try a change of pace or a change of luck, like Lewis has. That's rejuvenated him. Okay, back to the situation. Yeah. I'm glad that Ferrari are taking risks. They're trying an aggressive strategy to make the best of what they've got right now. And they did get the fastest lap. That's something. But at the same time, they need to actually put a little bit more research into this, because I thought the Fred Vasseur era would show competency, their ability to improve. And yeah, Fred is a calm head, and they do need that, because I think if they didn't have Fred right now, they would be in a full-on panic mode, because at one point, they could have led the Constructors. Right now, they're going to be lucky to hold on to third. This is almost like Aston Martin race by race. They start off as the competitors to Red Bull, and then they become also-rans that are now being beaten by Mercedes. What's going on? And then, quite simply, Alpine. This was a race to forget. Not only did Pierre Gasly have a 50-place grid penalty for all of the engine components he needed changing, but Ocon's strategy in Q1 just did not work, and that team did not look competitive at all. And sure, they're better than Williams at the moment, but Williams scored points. As Haas is now pulling away, Racing Bulls are starting to get their mojo back, and Alpine are going to have to fight tooth and nail to keep 8th. At one point, I thought they could have been getting back to 6th place, or at least 7th, but now they really need to find a miracle. They really need to find an upgrade package that works. But then at the same time, the strategy did not help them, and I think they could have done better had what they tried in Q1 worked, which is the same thing that happened with McLaren. It's what denied them the chance to really showcase a full circle maneuver which began at this track last year, and that that Oscar Piastri would be the right guy to partner Lando. And this video here that you can go and watch right now illustrates my point that maybe, over the long run, Oscar Piastri might be the better rival in terms of outsmarting and hoodwinking Max Verstappen.